How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to TheBlueShifting, and welcome back to Higurashi When They Cry. Wow, I can't talk today. Chapter 4. I'm gonna say I did some hosting, had some people over for the holidays, and so my voice is going to be a little more ragged than usual, and that's okay. It's good to see you here. Okay, so, I wish I could give you some more solid updates about stuff on the channel, but there's really not much I can get into here yet. I think we're just going to play it by ear. Know that there is going to be a live stream event celebrating the birth of the channel, which happens also around New Year's and Christmas. It's kind of like a tradition. I tend to do a live stream event of some kind. Last year we did Waifu Wars. This year I think it's gonna be a bit chiller, just because I have not had the time to be able to put a ton into it. But I do have a bit of a surprise for everybody. So if you can make it live or watch it post after it's been posted, I highly recommend you do so. It should be a pretty good time. Probably I'm gonna have my special reveal for something I'm working on, a bit of a project wise. And kind of like a hope that, you know, another thing you can maybe motivate you to continue to support the channel. And then secondly, I will play something. I'm either going to like do a live recording for Baldur's Gate 3 because I still want to get through that challenge run. And it just takes so much time. It might be fun to just dedicate like an actual live stream to the actual recording of the episode, and you know, we'll just kind of keep the live bits in there a little bit if they, you know, as they get featured. And then I could also play another game and just kind of showcase maybe some of my favorite like narrative games that I've played that I haven't, or really just can't see myself like putting on the channel just because of how long and in-depth they are. Because yeah, like there are RPG games that are basically like visual novels in length and like word count, but they also include gameplay. And while the games are amazing, it would be probably like a 200-part series to cover. So yeah, not sure if I would do that, but it could be fun to share with you a little bit, like especially because if you've never played a game like that, it might be fun to show it to you and be like, hey, like you might enjoy this, like it might be worth your time. So it's one of those two I'm thinking. Just something to kind of chill and hang out with. Maybe even we could even, heck, if we felt like that narrative one wasn't doing it, like I could do some like Total War, or even like group play stuff like Jackbox. Although I don't know. Every time I've done Jackbox in the past, it's been kind of like hit or miss. I like being able to play with people who I can like hear talking to me. So I'd rather play it with people in the chat. Like in like a live chat type of situation, so I'm not sure that'll play. Anyway, just I'm rambling. I also can't talk because, you know, that's my thing. Okay, last chapter. Basically kind of cemented in the fact that we are being absolutely outplayed. This investigator guy, like I'm surprised he survives, because it feels like he's being set up to be in imminent danger, like target number 1. We know that the person who ends up getting, you know, like goes to the dismemberment party is going to be the guy who's in charge of the dam site, who like the investigator played mahjong with in the last night of this episode. So I'm wondering if that incident's on the horizon, because it would be very like telling now that like after we've had like an interaction with him and we got some like inside information and suddenly he turns up dead. We also get some more insight into kind of like what the goings on are. Turns out, honestly, the biggest surprise from last part that I didn't talk about was how Mion does seem really heavily involved even now at this time of age, where when she talked about the events around this time period, she talks about them longingly, but I got the impression at the time that she was young and was kind of witnessing things like in passing, but was really proud of her family's role in preventing the dam from going up. You know, something you inherit like as a child, as in like, oh, they tell stories about it unless you're really like excited and like proud to be a part of it. I didn't realize that she was so heavily politically involved already as the speaker for her grandmother, and like already had so much power in the family at the time. Like, granted, it's still not even as much as she has in the future, but still, like I was a little surprised by that. And then, you know, Rika, you know, her involvement and her second voice and all that stuff is really interesting. Anyway, let's dive right in and see what horrors await. I had a restless night's sleep. I did nothing but turn over repeatedly during the night, and it seemed like it lasted for eternity. Even then, I eventually fell asleep at some point, not realizing how high in the sky the sun had risen. I shook off the urge to go back to sleep. It was then I noticed that the phone was ringing. Of course. The time was almost 10:30 in the morning. He's getting worse and worse at his like important meeting and call in the morning check-ins. It was clearly too late for a wake-up call.
Akasaka-san desu ka?
Oh, Oishi.
Ohayou gozaimasu. Oishi desu.
That laugh. Waking up to the sound of Oishi's voice was a little too much of a shock. My delicate ears were ringing. But thanks to that shock, I was suddenly wide awake.
どうも、おはようございます。
ひょっとして、今お目覚めですか?
Yes.
出張中とはいえ、勤務時間には起きないといけませんよ。
まったくです。以後、気をつけます。
あなたの眠気をもう一つ覚ましてあげられるかもしれない話があります。
Talking about being like at work, I'm technically on call right now. Like, so ironically, you won't see it, but from my perspective, the idea that I am like basically going to be going into work at any time, just because it's like it's during a time period where they just don't need as much staff because of like the activities that they're doing. And so thankfully it means I have a little bit of a break, but the downside being I need to be on call a lot. And that means I have to be awake and alert for the whole time. So benefit, I'm already kind of used to staying up at night. Downside is I've had a long day. I'd love to get extra sleep and it's hard to not want to just curl up and lay down, but I need to keep myself awake. So that's why I'm recording tonight. It's going to be good. But, yeah, like it's funny because like I kind of feel the sleepy coming on, and like I'm like, no, stay awake. And it's funny because like if I were at work, I wouldn't be feeling sleepy. But part of the reason why I get so tired when I'm at home is just the fact that like I'm at home, I'm comfortable here. At work, it's a lot easier because there's stuff to sink myself into, and like you think the channel would be like that too, but I find this so relaxing. It's like I don't know, it's just odd. But it's like it's funny. I have a kinship right here where it's like I shouldn't have a good excuse for being sleepy at all.
ひなみざわ駐在所から届いた遺失物に興味深いものが混じっていたんです。
Why are we hearing the chimes of insanity? That's very odd.
遺失物?
詳しい話はこちらにいらっしゃってからにしましょう。
Okay.
お昼前に来れますか?
That doesn't bode well.
いえ、すぐに伺います。
Oishi already knew that what my mission was. Since Oishi said it was something that would wake me up, it was hard to believe that it would be irrelevant to me. Honestly speaking, judging by the information that Sato-san yesterday, knowing my cover was already blown, I couldn't wander into and from Himazawa carelessly. In other words, my investigation was at an impasse. If there was some information that could put me back on the trail, that would be nothing less than a stroke of good fortune. After vigorously washing my face, I pulled on my jacket and hailed a taxi, heading towards the Okinomiya police station. How much you want to bet that taxi driver is going to inform on your movements?
天才ジャンシ様の到着だ。
遅くなって申し訳ありません。で、一体何が出たんですか?
With absolutely no intention of reminiscing about last night's mahjong game, I pressed him to get to the point. Oishi, anticipating that I would act that way, cut to the chase without any resistance.
先ほども申し上げましたが、今朝ひなみざわの駐在所から遺失物が届きました。
Oh, it's going to be a message of some kind. The lost items that were turned over to the police box were sent to Okinomiya Station after the paperwork was filled out. Oishi pulled out a plastic bag from the drawer and laid its labeled contents on the desk.
財布ですか?
でしょうな。中には小銭はあってもお札はなかったもんなんで、スリが中身を抜いた後に捨ててったのかななんて思ったんですがね。
Right.
最初は。
I didn't understand how this wallet so far removed from Tokyo could possibly be related to the kidnapping. If it had to draw on Oishi's attention, it would have been something dramatic, like the wallet belonged to the missing grandchild. That would be absurd. Like something that convenient would happen. If that was it, that was probably that there were probably initials written on the wallet, like the initials of Toshiki Inukai, the minister's grandson, T.I. Thinking like that, at this point, I didn't suppose this wallet was something that could get Oishi excited. Oishi, after putting on a pair of disposable plastic gloves, handed me a pair of the same. I didn't feel like this wallet was such an important thing, so I had my doubts as to whether there was any point in putting on gloves. However, I didn't want Oishi's intention to go to waste, so I put them on. Also, doing the job where I wear gloves all the time because it's possibly a problem, considering that this could be evidence, I would be wearing gloves regardless. Like, like at my work, it's about keeping us safe from possible like chemicals, contamination, and other things like that. Like everything's already in sealed containers, and those are also tend to be in bags. But we still are wearing gloves because you never know. Like something could be leaking, something could be like covered with like a chemical or a cleaner, like a cleaner that's got like bleach chlorine in it or something. Like you never know. It's like I'm surprised he's like, I don't know if I need to wear gloves. That's like, dude, this could be evidence. Like you should be very careful. Oh, but this might not be at the time. Like they might like fingerprint lifting is probably a thing in the 80s, but I doubt that I don't think the DNA like analysis was a thing until the late 90s, and even then it was dubious for about a decade. Oishi opened up the plastic bag and pulled it out, showing me the back. As I'd imagined, there were initials engraved there, but it was slightly more detailed than what I had thought, with Toshiki I marked on it. Wow. Oishi grinned at me with a look on his face and said, "See? We can't confirm that this belonged to the minister's grandson," I informed him calmly. This wallet was irrelevant. It was nothing more than Oishi over-eagerness. First of all, there was absolutely no way in this distant locale that the missing grandchild's wallet would be found at such a convenient timing. No, it's intentional. After all, this Onagafuchi Guardian wasn't related to the case in the first place. So there was no way this wallet belonged to the grandson. Now you're thinking like Keiichi here. Like, I'm looking at evidence that corroborates every fear I have, but it can't possibly be real. Why I wanted to decide that was the case, even I didn't really know. Even though that's what it should have been top secret cases leaked before I'd even been dispatched. In this situation, how could I say this is definitely unrelated? Would it be more prudent to pay attention to this wallet? It had only been a couple of days since I arrived at Hinamazawa, but in those couple of days, due to the number of remarkable events, my nerves might have become just a little frayed. Mine are a little frayed. I'm like watching this story as a fiction, and I'm sitting here on pins and needles. Shaking my head slightly, I cleared it of unnecessary thoughts. Oishi opened the wallet zipper, revealing the contents. Inside were small change and a number of crumpled receipts. Oishi, from that jumble, pulled out a folded card. Seeing that, my heart stopped for a moment. It was a card from a dental examination. Oh, the name Toshiki Inukai and the age. A perfect match. The dentist's location was in Tokyo. There was no need to explain any further. Yeah, it's like pretty blatant. Yeah, this is clearly a message, but man, that's creepy. How far was it from Tokyo to Hinamazawa? It was far enough that taking a bullet train and cars would still take several hours. Why would a wallet with a dental examination card from Tokyo inside show up in Hinamazawa? Could it belong to a tourist who came from Tokyo? Or maybe a villager on vacation to Tokyo who just happened to pay a visit to the dentist? No, it had to have been fallen into somebody's bag by accident. In my mind, I desperately struggled to find a possible excuse as to why this wallet didn't belong to Toshiki Inukai. It was as if it just wouldn't do for this wallet to belong to him. However, weeding out any possibility for error one by one, the haze surrounding the wall in front of me faded, gradually letting it come into clear focus. This should be good, though. You have solid evidence you can report. You can get all the forces of Tokyo in this area. Like, that should be the best thing that could happen, because what I was assuming was going to happen was that we were going to have a lot of circumstantial evidence that wasn't going to draw enough, potential support to actually get some help out here, putting him in danger situation just by being out here and isolated. With this alone, Tokyo should just come descending like a plague of locusts on Hinamazawa. So why is this a bad thing?
Ne?
I felt a shiver of electricity run up my spine. My pulse quickened and a thin film of sweat began to coat my entire body. From Oishi's point of view, I was probably slack-jawed and spaced out with a Slavic look on my face.
この歯科には問い合わせましたか?
そりゃ赤坂さんの仕事でしょ。私はまだそこまでは。
That was actually kind of nice of him, considering.
この財布はいつ頃のものでしょうね。
拾ったのは村人です。昨日のことだそうで。
じゃなくて、この財布はいつ頃落ちたものでしょうね。
ここいらに雨があったのはちょうど先週7日前。中身が水にやられた様子はないから、最長で6日前からでしょうね。
Gotcha.
この財布の存在は 署内で誰が知ってます？
初期対応のひなみ沢駐在所の警官、それから遺失物対応で係が2、3人。あとは私とあなた。
Alright.
内緒の事件と関係があったらまずいでしょ？
Yeah, you could say that.
ベラベラとは喋ってないつもりですよ。
電話を借りていいですか？
Yeah.
どうぞどうぞ。外線は0発信から。
There we go. I dialed the phone number inscribed on the examination card. I could hear my pulse pounding inside my head. Could there possibly be something so absurd? The address on the receipt and the cards inside the wallet were all from around the area where the grandson lived. The name on the examination card was also a match. The time we deduced that the wallet had been left behind also matched up with the timeline of the kidnapping. Of course, it was possible I could just laugh it off at all a big pile of coincidences. There wasn't any strong evidence. Rather than all the circumstantial proof, the contents of the phone call I was about to make would have much greater meaning.
はい、お待たせしました。中川歯科です。
Hi.
どうも。こちらは沖宮署です。実は、お財布の落とし物がありまして、所有者の連絡先を探しております。
It's interesting that he's identifying himself as part of the Okonomiya Police Department. It kind of makes sense, but it's interesting that he would do that.
ご協力をいただいてもよろしいでしょうか。お財布の中に、そちら様の診察カードが入っておりまして。氏名は、犬飼俊樹くんです。カードの番号を申し上げますので、電話番号をお調べいただいてもよろしいでしょうか。ありがとう。お願いできますか。
Still holding the receiver, I pulled out a notebook from my breast pocket with my free hand. I opened it up to the page with the grandson's address and phone number recorded on it.
どうもすみません。はい。お願いします。
I compared the phone number written in my notebook to the one that was being read aloud on the other end of the line. During that process, I spun around to look behind me uneasily. I locked eyes with Oishi. Oishi looked puzzled, wondering what the matter was. Why would I feel uneasy and look behind me? There's that chimes again. These chimes are going to haunt my playthrough because ever since chapter 3, they're going to just be everywhere. And the thing is, I think they were even in chapter 1 and 2. I just didn't think much of it other than making like a passing remark. But chapter 3, it really started to get hammered home. And now they're here again. I'm going to like be walking around my normal life one day. I'm going to hear these chimes and I'm just going to break into a cold sweat and wonder why I'm about to die. The only time I could ever hear these chimes and not be freaking out would be if I'm actually in Japan at a shrine and like watching like part of like a ceremony. Because then like that makes sense because that's where these chimes would be. Again, though, that's another thing to be thinking about. Actually, like there's a lot of spookiness to the chimes in itself, but they're specifically doing because these are the ceremonial chimes, right? They're like it's like the on the end of a stick with a bunch of like bells, kind of like woven into the end on. Like, if I recall correctly, like part of the Miko outfit of traditional Shinto like shrines. Like, I'm remembering that properly, right? Like, I imagine that design could be different from shrine to shrine, but like the core concept is the same. And that's what this is, right? That's what it's supposed to represent. Because again, that's interesting that the chimes are being tied to the Further shrine and Rika's behavior. And so like the Rika and the shrine and Oyashiro, like the curse, like the shrine is important in all of this somehow. Like it feels obvious on the surface level, but I'm talking about like diving into like the deepness of it. It's like, why would the writers choose to use the chimes, like shrine chimes, to signify when something eerie and mystical is happening, beyond the fact that you can associate mystics and religion fairly, they're very related to each other. That was because the person on the end of the line was reading out the numbers as though doing straight from my notebook. Seeing the HQ is in for quite the uproar thanks to my report. No matter how many times the authenticity of the evidence I had linked to the grandson was called into question, I could only respond that it was the truth. When the lead investigator first picked up the phone, I was grilled about the evidence I'd found. It was almost too good to be true, if I do say so myself. Yeah, no, it feels intentional. Still, there's only two things I can think about, like, it would be the reason being. Number one, it's them taunting us, right? Like, it's people inside the Guardians who are purposely trying to bait out a response. Because if they can catch us doing an illegal investigation, it'll put a ton more pressure on the whole situation. Number two, there's an insider who feels guilty who wants to help. Sato-san, who was our informer, maybe he happened to find the wallet, or maybe there's another person who's more closely related to the child who's dropping the hint, or it also could be, here's the last one, probably the most likely. Whoever did the kidnapping has it been in contact with the chairman of the construction department or whatever that the actual department name was, right? In that community, in that conversations, there usually are ways and tactics of trying to keep the pressure up, right? Yakuza have done this too. And one of the things that can really put the pressure on like high is sending like a piece of finger or an ear, like a physical part of the person who's been kidnapped, to put a lot of pressure on, you know, right? Like a permanent disfigurement type of thing. Maybe in this case, the Guardians are taking a lighter approach where they're saying, hey, we actually do have him, by the way. Here's proof. And we're going to send it in a way that nobody can dispute. And that's what this is. Maybe this is intended to be a message to put more pressure on the governor or whoever it is that's like whose grandson's been kidnapped. Anyway, okay. But after doubt dispelled, he fell into silence. The receiver was finally handed over to the section chief. When he picked it up, the background thrum at the other end of the line disappeared, and I knew it had gone completely silent. After asking the same questions about the wall that lead investigator did, the chief quietly spoke his next words.
わかりました。こちらから何人か増援を送ります。
Alright, here we go.
今日の夕方には到着できるでしょう。赤坂くんは引き続き現地調査をお願いします。財布が発見された地域の情報を収集しててください。加納さんは何人か選んで現地へ直接。
I hope in his report he also mentioned the fact that he's been compromised, because if he like they should know that. The fact that he was sending Kanao with the lead investigator here meant that the chief had decided there was a possibility that the Onagafuji Guardians were somehow implicit in the kidnapping. Somehow? I'm pretty sure it feels explicit. However, it feels as though until the lead investigator, whom he trusted, had verified the evidence with his own eyes, he was still going to be skeptical about it. What is it with this music?
本庁から増援が出発するそうです。私は現地調査を命じられました。財布の落ちていた場所は
高津戸のあたりだそうです。
Takasudo.
ここが沖宮。ずーっと行ってここがひなみ沢で、さらに上流にぐーっと上がっていくと、この辺が高津戸です。
So it's further upstream of Hinamizawa itself, further into the mountains. And isn't that kind of the direction that the eventual disaster that we saw in chapter 3 originated from? It's like up in the mountains from like the one of the volcanoes there. Oishi explained where the wallet was found by pointing at locations on the map on the wall. This place called Takasudo was even more remote than Hinamizawa was.
高津戸界隈はほとんど民家なんかありませんよ。昔の廃村です。
It was deserted a long time ago. That's a good place to hide. Also, Takasudo, maybe I'm just conflating too much, but in the core chapters, is Takasudo where the drum that was where Takano's body was found, cooked basically, burned in an oil drum up in the mountains? Wasn't that in Takasudo?
無人の家屋が点在する、なんとも寂しいあたりですね。
大石さん、高津戸へ案内してもらうことはできますか？
構いませんよ。赤坂さんお一人ではなかなか自由にひなみ沢に出入りはできないでしょうからね。無論また野球帽とマスクをしてもらうことになりますが。
Right. That Oishi had agreed to accompany me was very reassuring. If Sato-san's info was to be believed, my cover had been blown. I wasn't sure if the villagers had realized that the fresh meat dispatched from public safety was the tourist that had visited the village yesterday, in other words, me. But deciding that they hadn't noticed would be overly optimistic. Given a cursory thought, Takasudo, where the wallet was found, couldn't be ruled out as a hiding spot for the kidnappers. The Takasudo area didn't have any residential buildings, nor was it alongside a highway. There wasn't a reason for even the locals to go out of their way to visit it. It was exactly what you would call a long-forgotten ghost town at the end of the road. You couldn't ask for a better place to hold a kidnapped grandson. Also, you couldn't get to Takasudo without passing through Hinamizawa first. Here's the other thing though, I know they wanted to investigate, but isn't it where this wallet was found? Okay, first of all, too, there's so many things that are problematic here, right? Here's the thing. Number one, Why, if it's abandoned, was a resident able to retrieve the wallet and turn it into the lost and found? That's a highly motivated like retrieval, right? That's odd. So I would want to figure out who that person is too, and figure out why like they were even up there if you can. That might be better to do when reinforcements arrive. Number 2, isn't it odd that like they would want to send him to investigate the location where the dropped wallet was? Because if they even like potentially tip off the fact that the kidnappers, like the where the kidnappers are has been compromised, they're just going to move the hostage. Now that doesn't mean it would be impossible to follow them, but putting that kind of pressure on them when our best lead is taking them to that specific area feels reckless at best. But then again, I guess you could argue that like when it comes to kidnap cases, speed is of the essence. So it might be worth taking greater risks if it means getting an operative close enough to potentially perform a rescue. But still, setting him up there by himself basically is really scary. Those several conditions made the area all the more important. I couldn't brush it off any longer. There was no longer any doubt that Onagafuchi Guardians or somebody hired by them were involved in the kidnapping. That was the case, then the fact that this wallet was found might have already been leaked to them. They even knew so much as how the Public Safety Division was operating. The case of the wallet couldn't be something they didn't know. In that case, there's a possibility that the enemy was lying in wait. I hadn't even thought of that properly, but that's absolutely true as well. Like I mentioned how it could have been left intentionally, but I hadn't thought that they might actually try and trap somebody and maybe lay like an ambush. I just thought it was more like the idea of it was being a message. To dive alone into enemy territory, surrounded by enemy territory, to say the least, required an amount of courage, nay, recklessness that I just did not have.
大石さんの同行がなければ、そうおいそれと踏み込めない村でしたので、ご協力いただけて、正直なところ、またお金を要求されるのではと思ってましたよ。
それは正直を言えば、ひなみ沢なんか好き好んで行きたがはないですからね。運賃でも弾んでもらいたい気分ですが、でも一緒にタコを囲んだ友人の頼みとあれば断るわけにはいきませんしね。
Yeah. We all know you're also like heavily invested in seeing the families get caught. Although I guess he might have been motivated by the damn experience of like the death there to really hound in on the Sonozakis. Maybe he hasn't gotten that obsessive yet. Roishi grinned as he pounded me on the back. It struck me that he didn't just want to jump ship rather than having any sort of sense of duty towards his job. Even so, that didn't really matter. Right now, I really appreciate the gesture.
では、早速出してもらえますか。
If the enemy knew that the police had obtained the wallet, then they would probably have moved the hostage to a different place. There wasn't a moment to lose. But Oishi, without regard to the fact that we were about to head out, began to remove his jacket.
何をしてるんですか。
まあ用心ですよ。家中の栗を拾うなら相応の用意が必要と思いますね。
He's gonna put on like a stab or a ballistic vest.
あなたも来ます。
What Oishi pulled from the drawer below the desk was a stab-proof vest. Aren't stab-proof vests basically like chainmail? His name was Toshiki Inukai, the grandson of the Minister of Construction Inukai. There was only one reason for him to being here. If you didn't include gym or art class, his grades were above average. That was the result of having private tutoring sessions twice a week. If you omitted the fact that he still couldn't do pull-ups, there wasn't much else that would make him hate school. Of course, he understood full well that his grandfather was a cabinet minister, but he also knew that not too many people were that interested in the relationship. He didn't like to go out of his way to bring up his grandfather or to call him the Minister of Construction. And finally, he at least tried to know a little more about what kind of work the Minister of Construction did than your average Joe. What that entailed was that when you tried your best to make life better for the masses, sometimes you make a few enemies. He knew that all too well from the time he'd spent as a class representative. His grandfather had many enemies. He knew that they might personally catch some of the fallout, so he had to have been twice as cautious. He was taught that by his parents. That's why, the moment he was kidnapped, he instantly knew that this was one of those occasions. He understood that he wasn't being treated as Toshiki Inukai, the person, but rather as Toshiki Inukai, the grandson of the Minister of Construction. That he wasn't personally at fault, that this was the result of some unavoidable trouble with his grandfather's work. It made a little difference, but when he realized it wasn't because of anything he did, he was able to relax, if only a little. Of course, at first he was struck with the terror of befitting his age, wondering what was going to happen to him. But after a while of being tied up and only able to stay laying down, he began to ponder a great many things. First, he thought about the reason he was being abducted like this. He understood the answer to that easily. He was taken hostage to coerce his grandfather, the minister. There was no doubt about it. He didn't know exactly what the Minister of Construction did, but it was easy to imagine that there was much to be gained from threatening him. He respected his grandfather more than most. He earnestly believed his own grandfather was within the top 20 of the most important people in Japan. That was exactly why he wouldn't forgive anybody who tried to threaten his beloved grandfather. More importantly, he wouldn't forgive anybody who would use him as a tool to threaten his grandfather. His grandfather was really busy and rarely had time to meet with his relatives. That's why, with what little time he did manage to scrape together, he just dropped by unannounced. And as an apology for not being able to meet during the New Year's or summer vacation, he doted on his grandson very, very much. The number of times that Toshiki was looked upon with disregard just because his grandfather was a politician and a minister certainly weren't few. But he never thought even once that he wanted his grandfather to quit being a politician. Because it was his beloved grandfather. He wanted to continue his career as long as possible from the bottom of his heart. However, Toshiki was now being held hostage and his grandfather was being threatened. His grandfather, who called him the apple of his eye, was surely suffering. He might do anything to save his grandson. Maybe even putting aside his ideology if it was required to save his grandson. These are very complex thoughts for a child. He might cave to the culprit's demands if it meant saving his grandson. When Toshiki thought about that, an inexplicable anger welled up within him. In his current situation, he was unable to forgive the cowards who would make his beloved grandfather suffer by using such dastardly means. That feeling slowly swelled up within inside him, displacing his fear. What he thought of first was something any boy would imagine. Get out of these bonds, beat up the bad guys, and hand them over to the police. Images of all the brave heroes from all the manga he'd read passed through the back of his mind. In his imaginary scenario, he slipped his bonds easily, floating like a butterfly to evade his captors and stinging like a bee to bring them all down. In the end, it was nothing more than a silly little fantasy, but his vision obscured and unable to see anything, it was something that he could get into more than any anime in the moment. In actuality, he was enjoying these little scenarios in his head for a long period of time as he was tied up. His captors hadn't really done anything to him that he would feel sorry for. However, eventually he began to grow tired of his fantasies and more realistic scenarios began to run through his head. It was then he realized that none of them were a solution. Yes, he wanted to do something for his grandfather who was being threatened. That he was being held here to inflict pain on his grandfather was the thing that he could least forgive, and also the most vexing. And then he noticed there was a much simpler way he could have helped save his grandfather without having to beat up his despicable captors. That was to remove himself as a hostage from their hands of the villains. If he was to disappear from here, his captors would have nothing to threaten his grandfather with. The captors had restrained him, but they didn't treat him roughly, and they made sure he was fed well enough. Meaning, at most, he was nothing more than means to their threat. They weren't looking to bully or kill him out of spite. If he behaved, no ill will would befall him. Realizing this gave him a strong sense of courage. And carrying his train of thought this far, he let it run its course to its natural conclusion. Right now, at this moment, Toshiki Inukai had decided to escape. His ears had been stuffed with sponge-like material, acting like makeshift earplugs. However, they didn't actually do much to block out any sound, and he could overhear everything his captors were saying. Realizing that this was his advantage, even when his captors spoke to him, he acted like he couldn't hear them due to the earplugs. Clever kid. His captors, thinking that he couldn't hear the conversation, talked all about all sorts of things without any reservations. Thanks to that, he was able to obtain various pieces of information. First off, this wasn't Tokyo. It seemed that this was quite a distance away, and on top of that, in the countryside, nestled deep in the mountains. It also seemed his captors were inconvenienced living out here, so he could deduce that this place was far removed from any sort of town. Finally, whenever they went out to buy food or other supplies, they would always take a car. That fact caused him some dismay, because he knew the method he learned at school of running around blindly while shouting for help wouldn't work here. He paused his little mental escape scenario there. Yeah, this idea of learning, running around screaming for help, that would work in Tokyo pretty well. Not here. His ultimate goal is to find somebody who would help him. If somebody would fit that description and wasn't close by, his chances of escaping successfully grew slim. A desolate, far-off land deep in the mountains? A place where you couldn't even go shopping without using a car? In this situation, escaping would be very difficult. He grew depressed, and after a little while, he returned to his original scenario, imagining becoming a hero like in the manga he read, and beating down his captors became his respite. However, as he played those delusions out in his head, his heart, hating to surrender, continued to search for a way to escape. And then he thought of a way. If the goal was far away, and all he had to do was get closer. His goal, in a nutshell, was to find somebody who would help him. In other words, somebody other than his captors. He faked being sick, and his captors would have to take him to the hospital or bring a doctor to him. They would probably be reluctant to do that, but he already knew that the hostage was more important than anything. If the off chance that something happened, like him dying, occurred, they wouldn't be able to threaten anybody anymore. Well, they might, because they could just pretend you're still alive. Luckily, he had experience with that would had an experience that would help him fake a serious illness. At the end of last year, he was inadvertently involved in a car accident and had undergone surgery. The scar from that surgery is still clearly visible in his lower torso. He recalled the pain and suffering from that time. The existence of that experience would make a huge impact on the realism of his performance. He was quite confident in his ability to fake an illness. His captors at first took that as a sign that he needed to use the washroom. Untying only his arms, they tried to bring him there while he was still blindfolded. But he didn't try to get up. His hands, now free, only clutched his abdomen and he writhed in agony.
Oi, どうしたんだ? 腹でも痛いのか?
He still had his earplugs in, so he had to pretend he didn't hear his captors asking the question. He was about to nod so hurriedly he had to stop himself.
どったんね?
小僧が腹を押さえてるよ。腹痛かな?
His captors looked down on his suffering for a bit more. One of them proposed a course of action, while the other laid out his doubts that Toshiki might be faking it.
どったんね? 坊主。腹痛むんかい?
そいつ、耳を塞いでるから聞こえてないぜ。
参ったんな。腹痛に効く薬なんかあらんね。薬局行って買ってくるか。
腹痛って言ったっていろんな薬があるだろう。症状がわからないうちはいい加減な薬は買えないぜ。
腹押さえてるし、便秘やん。
Oh, ease. Like, I thought E was referencing a person. No, he's like, E's elbow in his stomach. He's like, they're having like a country accent.
便秘薬でも買ってくれば収まるやんね。間違って飲んでも死なんしな。
決めつけるなよ。盲腸とかかもしれないだろう。
Yeah, appendicitis. That sucks.
俺のおじさんがさ、昔急になったことあってよ。あれはかなりビビったぜ。
I had it in high school. Like, I was in 11th grade. And, like, I was so young that when my dad took me to the hospital, like, they didn't believe me. Because I had, like, seen enough, like, I was a weird kid. I grew up watching, like, medical shows, because it's what my parents sometimes would watch. One of my favorite shows of all time is actually MASH. Like, it's just an old show. But really, really good. And they have a lot of examples of medical stuff that happens in there, and one of them is appendicitis. So when I actually started developing the symptoms, I kind of recognized a lot of them. And so I go into the hospital saying, like, I think my appendix is going. And they were like, I don't know. So they ran some tests. They're like, we don't know. We'll do an MRI. They checked the MRI. And then, like, I went back to the room. I was, like, in there for 30 minutes while they were, like, reviewing the footage. And then suddenly the doctor came in with a bunch of nurses. And they're like, we're going to the ER right now. That thing's going to pop. I was right. I'd called it from the beginning. But, yeah, having that happen when you're, like, still in school, it's very uncommon, but it can happen. One of the captors leaned over beside the boy, who was bent over in agony.
かわいそうにな。全身汗だらけじゃないかよ。腹か？痛むのか？おいおい、痛むんならあんまり抑え込んじゃかえって悪いぞ。
Realizing his captors were concerned about his stomach, he inadvertently let his shirt right up, letting the scar from his surgery come into plain view. He's really clever. His vision was still obscured with packing tape, so he couldn't see their reaction to his scar. But his captors were taken aback, and judging from their momentary silence, he had obtained the reaction he was looking for.
おい、やばいぜ。この手術跡はそんなに昔のものじゃないぜ。
その小僧、熱出てるんかいね。体温計あるん？
あるわけねえよ。でもすごい汗だぜ。おでこは結構熱いと思う。緊張状態が続くとさ、昔の傷なんかに応えたりするって聞いたことあるぜ。
He is right about that.
じゃあどうすんよ。薬じゃ治らんちゅんてんか？
何の手術跡か知らねえけど、とにかくまずいだろ。下手すると命に関わるぜ。
まずいんて。これは本当にまずいんて。
医者に見せた方がいい。このままじゃ突然ぽっくりいっちまう可能性だってあるだろう。
Toshiki Inukai, with those few words, knew the situation was progressing exactly as he had envisioned, and and snickering to himself on the inside, pressed on his act even further. He didn't even need to see to know that his captors were panicking and when running around like chickens with their heads cut off at the troublesome turn of events.
診療所を連れて行くか。
そりゃまずん。
Yeah, if you don't have a doctor who's like in on the conspiracy, it's going to be real problematic.
先生を連れてくる方がいいね。
入江の先生か。
Oh, Irie. So was Irie involved in all of this from way back in too?
いいのか？大丈夫か？
人質に何かあったらまずんね。
Irie. Is he the one that turns in the wallet? That would make a lot of sense.
しゃあない。緊急事態やん。
One of the captors hurriedly left in the car. Another of the men, completely shaken up at this point, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. It looked like they were bringing a doctor. As long as the doctor wasn't an accomplice, the doctor was his goal. He was someone he should seek help from. His captors were probably wary of that happening. They would be prepared for it. This would all come down to luck. Some of the sweat emerging from his brow was from that nervousness. At that moment, the packing tape was covering his eyes and ears were torn off. The burning light that he was seeing for the first time in several days hurt his eyes. After that, the gag made it hard for him to breathe was also removed.
大丈夫かこそ。今お医者を連れてくるからな。しばらく我慢してろな。
This kid, I like him. He's actually very impressive. The doctor's coming. The doctor is coming. Now, how is he going to ask for help and how is he going to get away from his captors? A plethora of thoughts began to swirl in his mind.
わかってると思うが、お医者に余計なことは言うなよ。俺たちも別にお前に乱暴がしたいわけじゃないんだ。そりゃわかってるよな。
Toshiki Inukai nodded with feigning pain and obedience. He has expectation to the enemy's expectations. Whether they doubted he was faking his illness or not, they knew what his goal was and would try to stop it. His stomach contracted from the stress of this gambit, making it seem like his stomach really was starting to hurt. No, it really was. But there was no reason to panic. If he failed with his approach to the doctor, there's nothing to lose. If there was something to lose, it was the method of faking illness to get in touch with the doctor. If he could think of other methods from here on out, it wasn't much. But at the present, this was the easiest and most dramatic way he could think of. The more he thought about it, the more it looked like this was his first and last gambit. Eventually, he heard the sound of a car approaching once again. The sound of the car doors being hurriedly opened and shut. The sound of several footsteps approaching. It is him, the young man in a white medical coat. As he acknowledged the boy, a suspicious look showed itself on his face.
彼は村の子じゃありませんね。
The captors didn't respond. From the looks of it, the young doctor had realized this was an abnormal situation. One of the captors talked threateningly.
先生には関係のないことです。
For a while, the doctor and the captors silently glared at one another. However, unable to stand the sight of the boy continuing to suffer, the doctor, as the captors had hoped, didn't press any further.
その古い手術跡というのが何の手術でしたか？
そりゃわからないです。
本当は診療所に連れ帰るべきなんですがね。
先生、そりゃさすがにちょっと。
The doctor said he was wanting to bring the boy back to the clinic, but the captors simply silently shook their heads at the notion. It was a fleeting hope, but it was only natural the captors would refuse. At that moment, his eyes met with the doctor's. Seeing that the boy's painful state was abnormal, the doctor suspected it was a serious illness.
大丈夫ですか？
It's just me, the trustworthy doctor. Couldn't possibly be part of the cabal.
私は医者です。この手術跡はいつ頃のものですか？
去年の冬に事故で。
事故？そうですか。参ったな。
He couldn't let the doctor figure out that he was faking it here. He had to somehow figure out some way to keep this going and tell the doctor he was being confined and needed help.
患部を少し触りますよ。痛むところがあったら言ってくださいね。
Seeing that it was extremely painful, the doctor crossed his arms and began to ponder. He had to somehow get himself to a hospital. The Toshiki Inukai faking the illness was the performance of a lifetime. It literally is the performance of your lifetime. Oh, man. Oh, I'm impressed. I am impressed with this kid. Although, wouldn't that be sad if like inadvertently we pass them? It's like they're on their way down while we're on our way up. I just realized that could be a thing. That would be really sad. But I'm guessing that this is how the wallet gets discovered. I can see the doctor turning in the wallet, but like, maybe not. I don't know.
お暑いでしょうが、せいぜい頑張ってくださいよ。不法投棄のダンプが現れたらすぐにご連絡ください。急行いたしますのでね。
ご協力、感謝しますよ、大石さん。どうぞ。
A gap wide enough for a single car was opening up in the barricade. Oishi, showing his gratitude or perhaps a threatening attitude, with a short beep of the horn, rolled the car forward through the checkpoint. This time, my appearance was the very embodiment of the word suspicious. A baseball cap, mask, and sunglasses. On top of that, even though it was sweltering, I was wearing a hoodie. Any respectable police officer would be loath to not stop me for questioning. I had meant to be overcautious, knowing full well my face was known. It might have already been too late for that to have any use. Using that as an excuse, I doffed the unbearably hot hoodie and windbreaker, ripped off the mask and hat, and threw them into the seat behind me.
ありゃ、いいんですか？
こんな小細工したところで、どうせ割れているでしょうから。
そりゃまあそうでしょうな。
Oishi probably thinking that my unexpected behavior is funny because you get a laugh. Okay. This might be a bit controversial, but we're going for a while. I feel like there's a while yet for this chapter. Like, sometimes the chapters are like a pretty nifty little package and you can kind of feel it wrap up. But like, I feel like we're going to go there, have like an investigation. We're also see like more about the kids, like attempted escape. So I think we'll just stop it here to keep it from getting overtime. Plus I gave you guys a real big one last week. So apologies for that, but I feel like this is just a healthy place to end it. Again, really impressed with the kid. The idea of him thinking this idea of like escaping and wanting to be and faking a sickness and using a previous injury, very, very impactful. Like I said, so those are my two theories that are going to be going on. Is that either like what we're seeing is the story of how the wallet got like discovered. It was like the doctor who dropped the wallet off, or the super tragic option, which is that we technically are passing them on our way up there, which would be so sad. Like knowing that if he actually had stayed, he inadvertently would have been like found sooner. And if anything, that to me feels like the right answer because of how tragic that would be. It's like so frustrating, but yeah, story got a story. So thank you all so much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed that. I like how they find the evidence and he actually did what I consider to be the smart thing. He actually called, he reported it. The people who reported it like didn't want to believe it, but once they like talked with him enough and kind of got the details, they took it fairly seriously. I guess it's all good to know. I'm curious to see how it's all going to pan out. I do feel like, oddly, things are going to escalate really quickly because I feel like as soon as you get a bunch of other investigators in here, like it's going to be harder to keep the tension high. So I'm almost wondering if this is like the kickoff point already. Like this day is going to actually be like really long and we're going to like try and like track the kid down ourselves and it's going to get really crazy here. The only other thing that's odd is like, I thought like how crazy would it be if somehow our investigator guy, right? You know how they talked about how like the people who like chopped up the site, the coordinator, they said like 5 of the 6 people turned themselves in, but 1 got away. What if this investigator guy gets super caught up into like the curse and inadvertently, what if he's that 6th person? And like that would be an insane twist. But I kind of keep watching and kind of feeling like, is there someone or something going to show up here that's going to be involved in that just got away? And it's like, who could that have been? And it's like, this investigator guy is a decent candidate for that. So that could be really interesting. Anyway, hope you don't mind it being a bit of a shorter episode, but I feel like it's a good place to stop. I promise we'll do a bigger one next time. We'll probably cover the rest of the story for this chapter. And yeah, thank you so much. Until the video watching me, see me next. I'll see you there.